hold it there. Let's see. Maybe I'll do this. It's a little unstable. Maybe if I put this here, something strong, right? So it's class like this. It's not the most flattering. Something a little higher. Okay. We are live on YouTube. We are live on Zoom. We are live on Facebook, although on Facebook it's not going to look as good. I'll try my best. See if you can find something just a little higher. Something square that's higher. We're going to share, even in the bathroom, it's fine. You can go get. We're going to share it on a couple of social, maybe the book, Mommy's book, would be great. Okay. Give me that. I'm just trying to get this situated. We are not in our normal location, so I am trying to make do. Okay, it's a little bit better. A little zoom in on the rabbi's stomach. Never hurt anybody. Maybe I'll sit like this. Okay. We're going to share this on a couple of social media platforms. You think it's entertaining, huh? I'm actually on the West Coast time for 6 o'clock where I am, but I am going to share this, and we are going to get straight into it. I appreciate your patience as I deal with technicalities in an undisclosed location. When I say undisclosed, it always means that next week I'll tell you where I was. So I'm not going to keep it a secret forever, but for now, suffice it to say that it's 6 p.m. and we're just sharing it on Facebook now, and we will be good to go, and we'll get into some interesting discussion, which I think actually is very fascinating from the Rebbe on this week's Parsha. Give me one more share here. Good evening, Kayla Gittel. Good evening, Jim. Good evening, Carmen. I have Chaya in the room, so at least somebody here can give me some kind of assistance if all technical hell breaks loose. Okay, I'm done sharing it on social media. Let me just open up this book that we're using for tonight. I'm not going to be using the regular Chumash. I didn't schlep it with me, but I am just opening a couple of files here on my computer, and we will be good to go. Okay. So today we're going to have a discussion about blessings, and that's an important discussion because so often, we get caught up with Judaism not being about reward and punishment, because it isn't, even though it is one of the 13 principles of Jewish faith that God punishes those who misbehave and he rewards those that behave. And when I say misbehave and behave, it does not refer to how you behave in your classroom in third grade with your teacher, but how you behave with God. So when you follow his rules, there's reward. We don't do it for the reward, but there is reward. And when we misbehave, when we don't follow his rules, whether it means we transgress the things he tells us not to do, or we refrain from doing the things he tells us to do, there is consequences. And that consequence, as I discussed recently, I'm trying to think if it was in a class or it was at my Shabbos sermon recently. Was it last week? Yes, that not just in the physical plane. Remember we discussed it regarding honoring your parents, that it's even in the physical plane. So there's reward, there's punishment, but is there more to it? And when God does bring us blessing, when God does bring us reward, how does that manifest itself? So I want to read to you from the second portion of the Shema, which is in this week's Torah portion. Last week in Va'et Chanan, in Va'eschanan, we read the first portion of Shema, the Shema Yisrael and Va'ahavta. This week in Parshat Eikev, in the third portion of Deuteronomy, we read the second portion of Shema that we recite in our prayers at least thrice daily with regard to the reward that God gives those who behave. The verse says, and I don't have the book in front of me, but it's I have a version of the book, but it's if you want to check it up later, it's chapter 11, verse 13. It says, "This will be if you constantly heed my commandments that I'm commanding you today, so as to love the eternal, your God, and to serve with your whole heart and with your entire being." So it talks about the importance of integrity, that when you serve God, it should be with all your heart and with all your soul. In other words, don't give God some half-baked devotion, right? What do they used to joke about? Grace after meals. Yabba dubba dub, thanks for the grub or something like that. If God gives you certain verses to say to thank him for the meal, and the sages instituted it in our prayer books, it's called Birkat Hamazon, or benching, the grace after meals. Do it like a mensch. You want him to give you a good, beautiful, healthy, scrumptious meal, give him a few minutes after to give him a proper thank you. So wholesomeness or integrity in our service of God is very important. But then the verse says, and here is verse 14, I will bring rain for you. I will bring rain for your land at its appropriate time, the drenching rains and the later rains, and you will gather in your grain, your wine, and your olive oil. So, of course, primarily in the land of Israel, you have the blessing of grain, wine, and olive oil, three foundational aspects both of sustenance and Jewish life, right? Having a good wine libation, for those that are not a part of AA, having a healthy, balanced libation is very much part of Judaism, saying a l'chaim, making kiddush, making havdalah, right? Wine is not a bad thing. It could be used as a bad thing, but it can also be a healthy thing if done with balance. And oil obviously is a very, for your health and for your food, for cooking, and then grain, three prominent things. And it says God will give you the rain and the later rains in the proper time. Now, what does that mean in the proper time? When is the proper time for rain? If you've been in Montana lately, you know that almost every day at 4 or 5 o'clock, this incredible thunderstorm rolls in, and it becomes I don't know, it's a lot of rain if you ask me, a lot of thunder and lightning too. So let's quote what Rashi tells us, the preeminent commentator of the Torah. Rashi says, first of all, he says, I will bring rain to your land. And Rashi says, quote from the Medrash, now that you have fulfilled your duty, I will fulfill mine. So, as they would call in the world of politics, quid pro quo. You do what God asked, he will do what you do. I do not want you to take that to understand that if you do what God says, you're guaranteed to see the results that he says over here, because that's not how God works, meaning it doesn't always play out in the revealed sense exactly as it says here, but that's the promise. And then it says at its time, that the rain will come at its time. And this is what we're going to focus on tonight. What I share with you tonight is from an incredible edited talk of the Rebbe in volume 19 of the Rebbe's edited talks. So Rashi says, at night, so that it does not inconvenience you. So first of all, when is God going to give you rain? When's the best time for rain? Unless you're a trucker on the 90 in the middle of the night, when's the best time to get rain? When everyone's asleep. First of all, personally, I can just say that when you're sleeping at night and you hear the rain coming down, there's something very soothing about it. First of all, maybe it's soothing because I'm indoors. But for me, it's always been, actually, the truth is that when we rented an RV during COVID, it was raining and we were in a campsite in Missoula. And actually, it was not as pleasant as when I'm indoors in my house. I felt like the rain was literally coming in on me. So, for whatever reason, rain at night is a great blessing because people aren't out there. And then Rashi continues, and he says another explanation. Let me just let one more person into class. Another explanation. At its time on Shabbos Friday nights when all are at home. So number one, every night's a good time. Why every night? Because workers are not in the field at night. So it's a great time for it to rain. So if you're in the realm of agriculture and you can work in your field all day and at night it's a machaya, it rains at night, you work at day, it's a win-win. But taking it a step further, Rashi brings a second interpretation that it's Friday night in particular. By the way, that's how I grew up. When I grew up, if it rained Friday night, I could always hear someone at the Shabbos table saying, oh, it's Friday night. It's a great time for Gishmei Bracha. It's a great time to get rain. Why? Because where's a Jew Friday? Well, I shouldn't say where's a Jew Friday night. Where should a Jew be Friday night? A Jew should be at their Shabbos table, having a nap, or getting a good night's sleep. In Jewish tradition, Friday night is a night for marital relations. So that's where they should be. One place you shouldn't be is outside. So if you're home and God gives you rain Friday night, it's a great blessing. Now, I mean, if you study the Talmud and the Tractate of Tainus, it mentions Tuesday nights and Friday night. Why is Tuesday night also considered a good time? So the explanation is that there's a certain negative star that we call Saturn, Shabtai, and it ascends at that time. So everyone's indoors, so it's a good thing. I mean, I don't know that today anyone follows when they go outdoors based on which galaxy is operating and which star is functioning. At least I don't. I don't know if a Tuesday night I go outside. I never check to see what stars are hanging out in the sky. You go do what you got to do. But that's what it says here in our Torah portion. Rashi's emphasizing specifically Friday nights and the idea of night. And the question really is, Rashi only comes to explain to us things that are not understood. If you read the verse and it says, God will bring rain for your land in its appropriate time. Why does Rashi need to tell us anything? The appropriate time is the appropriate time. Obviously, God will give it to us when it's most convenient for people. And yet over here, Rashi needs to tell us it's at night. And another opinion is that it's at Friday night when everyone's at home. So I want to read you a verse from Leviticus. We are now in Deuteronomy, but I want to jump backwards. I want to go backwards to Leviticus, where God says the curses and the punishments. And over there, I'm just pulling up in my Chumash here. Give me a second. I only have the Hebrew version, but I'll translate. He says, God says to the Jewish people that if they behave, if you follow my paths, right at the beginning of the last portion in Leviticus, so it's chapter 26, verse 3. If you follow my statutes and in my commandments, you observe and you do them, then I will give you your rain in its allotted time. And the earth will give its the agriculture it needs to give, its harvest. The Eitz Hasada Yitem Piri, and the trees of the field will give its fruit. The orchard will give fruit. So number one, why in our Torah portion does Rashi have to say anything? If God says I'll give it in the right time, I'll give it in the right time. Why do you have to give me two opinions? One opinion that it's at night. A second opinion is that it's Friday nights. Second of all, how do you match up these two verses? In other words, let me just fix that. How do you explain these two verses in Deuteronomy and Leviticus? What is it? Is God doing something different in Leviticus than he's doing in Deuteronomy? And if yes, what's he doing differently? There's a commentary on the Chumash named the Mizrahi. So it's not Rashi. It's a later commentary called the Mizrahi. And the Mizrahi says, he tries to say that the difference between us and Leviticus is that in Deuteronomy, it's a greater blessing. Because you did everything God said you should do, right? That's what the verse said, that you will, Im Shamaya Tishmu, you'll hearken to all God's commandments, and you'll love him with all your heart and with all your soul. So the Mizrahi tries to explain that over here in Deuteronomy, it's a greater blessing than in Leviticus. Because over here we did everything we're supposed to do, and that's why over here the emphasis on the blessing of not only the regular nights, but Friday night, the emphasis on all of that is over here. But that really doesn't make sense, says the Rebbe. Why doesn't it make sense? It's very interesting what the Rebbe says. If you look in Leviticus, when it talks about God giving the trees to the orchard, the explanation that Rashi explains and everyone else explains that it means that Ilonei Srak are infertile trees that don't give fruit, right? You ever go? We were just recently in the state of just to say, in the last few days I was in the state of Washington, and there's a lot of trees everywhere you go. To evergreen state, most trees don't give fruit. Comes along in Leviticus in Bechukai, and Hashem tells the Jews that if they do everything right, they're going to see miracles, that even barren trees will give fruit. Wow, it's amazing. So then how could the Mizrahi try to say that over here in Deuteronomy it's less of a blessing? I'm sorry, it's more of a blessing than in Leviticus. Leviticus is talking about supernatural stuff where barren trees are giving birth to, are producing fruit. So there obviously has to be a different explanation. And like I said, the Rebbe analyzes this quite in depth, but I'm going to give you the synopsis because I think it's very, very powerful. says that in the portion of, let me just pull it up here. I'm working on old school. Just a second. You guys are very patient. You're a very patient community while the rabbi. Oh, here we go. Dealing with notes online. If you look, says the Rebbe, at the actual verses, what you will find is something phenomenal. If you look in the verse in Deuteronomy, in our Torah portion, it says, "V'nasati mitar artzachem," bring rain for your land. And if you look in Leviticus, it says, "Gishmechem," your rain. It doesn't mention the land. Your rain. In other words, in Deuteronomy, in our Torah portion, the blessing is to the earth, to the land. In our Torah portion, in Leviticus, the blessing is to the people, to the Jewish people. And that is if you're reading the verses like I read it for the last 42 years, very superficially, you don't even pay attention. Blessing to the land, blessing to the people. It's the rain that's coming down for the agriculture. But here says, no, the Rebbe, if you focus on the actual grammatical words and the words as expressed in the verse and the difference in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, it's a major difference. In our Torah portion of Deuteronomy, we're talking about reward when you follow Torah, meaning you study the Torah and you do mitzvahs, you're doing everything right. You're operating within the letter of the law. Like Rashi says, you do what you're commanded, and I'll do what I promised. In other words, before I said you did what you were supposed to, so I'll take care of you. But that is is that a good thing or a bad thing? And the answer is, right now, from what the Rebbe is addressing, it seems like it's not such a good thing, meaning you didn't go above and beyond. You didn't go beyond the letter of the law. I was actually learning a discourse. This yesterday morning. I shared it with my father while I was FaceTiming with him. It's a discourse from 1959. And the Rebbe says that a Jew can, what does it mean in Deuteronomy, in Hazinu, when it says, they turn to me with their necks, but not their face. And the Rebbe says you can do mitzvahs. You could do it with love and fear of God. So you're emotionally connected. You both have a love for God and an awe of God, and yet it's considered a backhanded relationship. How come? Because you didn't do it with joy. You didn't do it with simcha, and you didn't do it with tuv levav. Tuv levav, the Rebbe says himself, what does tuv levav mean? Ribui simcha, an overwhelming amount of joy. You did it. You did it because you had to do it, and you even feel connected to it, but you're not joyous about it. So over here in this conversation about Deuteronomy versus Leviticus, the Rebbe says, oh, in Deuteronomy and the Shema, you study Torah and you do mitzvahs and you're doing everything within the letter of the law. You went to shul 3 times a day and you light Shabbos candles and you observe Shabbos and everything's in a square box. You have everything on the checklist is checked off. And therefore, God says, I will stick to what I promised, which is that you'll get rewarded. But how are you going to get rewarded? According to what you did exactly what you were told. God says, I'll also do exactly what I promised, but not a drop more. Is that something wrong with that? No, I think every one of us would be happy if God gave us everything he promised. But God is infinite. So he doesn't have to be limited by giving us just what was in the order, right? He meets out according to what we do, but he can go more than that. But why should he? You went like a square Englishman. You did exactly on the checklist. So God gives you everything from the checklist. What happens when you go above and beyond? That takes us to Leviticus. In Leviticus, it says, "In you will follow my statutes." What does Rashi say over there? Shetiu amelim b'Torah. What does amelim mean? You're sweating, you're toiling. In other words, you're going beyond the letter of the law. Oh, you're going beyond the letter of the law. God says, I'm not just going to bless your land, I'm going to bless you. In our Torah portion of Deuteronomy, God says, "Nasati mitar artzachem," I'll bless your land. Meaning, what happens with land? The land needs water. God will give it water. The land will have everything it needs. The land will not go barren. The land will not die. The harvest won't die. But does that mean that you'll have enough and more than enough of what you need? Not necessarily. The land could be in perfect shape and get all the nourishment and nutrients that it needs and the water that it needs, and you still won't get the crop that you could have had. But if you start operating beyond the letter of the law, lifnim mishuras hadin, you start amelim b'Torah. You're not just doing Judaism because that's what the checkbox says. You're not just doing Judaism because that's how your grandmother told you to do it and you're scared to offend her, even though she's in heaven for 200 years, you've been still scared of her. But you're doing it, and you're not just doing it with love and awe, you're doing it with simcha. This is where it's at, man. I'm invested. Oh, amelim b'Torah. God says, you know what? If you're amelim b'Torah, v'nasati gishmechem, I'm going to give you the rain. I'm going to give you the rain. I'm not going to give it to the land. Of course, obviously it goes to the land, but I'm going to give it to you. Meaning, you're going to be blessed. And you'll have so much. Not just the land will have its nutrients, you'll have so much blessing. So indeed, Leviticus is a greater blessing than in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy, it's God meting out to us everything that we need, that the land needs based on our square behavior, our finite activities. But when we go beyond the letter of the law, so does God. And when God goes beyond the letter of the law, then the blessing is also going to be above and beyond, which explains another difference. In our Torah portion, Rashi gives both opinions, that the rain will be at night, so it shouldn't disturb you, and it'll be Friday night when everyone's at home. But in Leviticus, right, in the other Torah portion, let me just pull it up here. In the other Torah portion of Leviticus, he just says, when people don't go out of their homes, like Friday night. What's the difference between the two? In Deuteronomy, it's all about the earth. So when Rashi comes to the earth, what's the first interpretation? Rashi says, when is it best for the earth as it relates to the agricultural work in the earth? When is the best time for the earth to get its rain? At night. Because no one's in the field. The farmers, the ranchers have gone inside. So Rashi says, you operated according to the realm of finite. You did everything you're supposed to. God is going to make the land blessed. What's the best way to bless the land? To make sure the work of the land, so that the land is doing well, does okay, and that the people involved in it shouldn't have to go above and beyond to make agriculture, to make the crop grow. So he gives you rain at night. But in Leviticus, where it's talking about someone going beyond the letter of the law, and the blessing is for the person, right? It's the person, not the land. And the person went so above and beyond with toil and sweat and blood and devotion and love and fear and joy in his service of Hashem. And the only thing he mentions over there is Friday night. Why? Because it's not about the land anymore. It's about the people. And when is the best time? If you were thinking about the people and not about the land, when's the best time that people can be blessed with rain? And imagine if every farmer's dream was to come true. Once a week on Friday night, he goes into his house. God gives Friday night enough rain that it brings miracles to the land, which means there's incredible superfluous crops for people way beyond what the farmer ever envisioned. And every other night, it's chill. Leviticus is all about the person. God is not just saying, I'll give you enough so the land doesn't become barren and the land doesn't supply food. I'm going to give you Kinahara, I'm going to give you above and beyond. And it's really an important distinction. And I was thinking about it a lot as I was prepping for class. You know, I mentioned Shabbos and Shul in between one of the Aliyahs. I mentioned this past week. And I've shared it at class before, but I think it's still important to remind ourselves that I was 20 years old, And I was working in a yeshiva, and there was a rabbi, Rabbi Nachum Greenwald, who lives in Lakewood. He was giving a class, and I remember I was sitting in the back of the room, and my ears perked up because I heard him saying something. What did he say? He said, people say to me all the time, I prayed to God and God didn't answer my prayers. And I said, what do you mean he didn't answer your prayers? He answered. He said, no. And I was sitting in the back of the room going, oh my gosh. For 20 years, I had this distorted Orthodox childhood where they told me that if you pray to God, he answers your prayers. They just forgot to mention. Sometimes he answers no, sometimes he answers yes. It was like earth-shattering to me. And I think in a similar vein, we always think about God blessing the world. Of course, God is blessing the world. The question is if the blessing is going to arrive in your lap or not. And even if it does arrive in your lap, is it going to be a very finite blessing that God is giving you based on how you treated him, he's treating you? And you could say, well, is God so childish? It's not about being childish. It's a growth process. God wants us to grow as human beings. And so he doesn't want to give us more than we earn if we're just doing sort of the basics checklist, because he wants us to invest ourselves. And if we're not invested, he wants us to be invested. So he'll give us just enough for the land to survive, that we know that he's answering our prayers, but he really wants us to become invested. And when we become invested and our service of him is suddenly not just by rote. I was in New York recently when I was picking up many from summer camps, I don't know, 3 weeks ago. I stayed at my friend's house in the Five Towns, and he said, oh, come with me. We're going to go to Myriv. We're going to go to evening prayers in the shul, which for me is a very rare thing because I don't have a minyan, so I normally daven at home. Sure, I come and I watch. It's like robots. Everyone goes to their exact same spot. Everyone's saying the same words by heart because we all know it by heart. We all answer amen in our sleep, alive. Doesn't matter if you're alive or you're dead or you're debilitated. It makes no difference. You know how to say everything automatically. And I grew up the same way. And there's always one guy in shul. When it comes to Amen Yeheshmei Rabba, to answer in Kaddish, he's Uman Yahai Shmai Rabba Mavura, and he's giving. Sometimes they're full of it, but I'd like to give them the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes you see a guy's heart and soul. He remembers learning in the Talmud that if you say Amen Yeheshmei Rabba with all your strength, it could annul decrees of 70 years of negativity. So he goes for it. But you could see it's heart and soul. There's rote, there's robots. This is how we do it for the last 3,000 years. And then there's people that are invested with heart and soul. And when we invest in heart and soul, not just in prayers, but when we do a mitzvah, you're going to make a blessing on a lulav and esrog. You're going to hear the shofar. You're going to make kiddush Friday night. You're going to put on your tefillin or put up a mezuzah on your door. Whatever, light your Shabbos candles, whatever mitzvah you're doing, you're not just doing it like a robot, because that's what we do. You're doing it with every fiber of your being. You're invested. You schwitz for it. If you don't know what schwitz is, you need to check yourself tonight or email your local Orthodox rabbi to figure out what that means. My trainer even knows. He's not even Jewish. He knows what schwitzing means now. It's a common word because he makes me schwitz all the time. But the point is, are you invested? Are you invested? Right? There's that famous analogy with the chicken and the pig, something like that, walking by the restaurant in the morning and they see the bacon and eggs for sale. And the chicken is all excited about it, you know. Look, my eggs are in the window. And the pig is like, you to get bacon, you know what they have to do to me? It's not about just dropping off an egg. I gotta die in the process. What is our level of investment? What is our level of toil? How excited are we to serve Hashem versus how much of it do we do because we feel burdened by it? If you feel burdened by it and you do it anyhow, that's wonderful. You should. But don't expect God to show up with bouquets of flowers to thank you with special overdoses of infinity when you didn't do it with heart and soul. Or you did it with heart and soul, but you didn't do it above and beyond the letter of the law. But when we go above and beyond, when we do beyond the letter of the law, when we do it with simcha, which is the greatest sign, when we do it with joy that we're doing it beyond the letter of the law, then the barren trees start giving fruit. The rain starts coming specifically Friday night. In other words, the blessing becomes about us. we are able to internalize it. We are able to be the receptacles of the blessing. It's not just the world is going to be blessed, and in heaven we're going to be blessed, and in the world to come we're going to be blessed. The blessing will be us in our life, but we have to open ourselves up for that, and that takes toil. That takes schwitz. That takes some self-sacrifice. That takes doing it when it's very hard. When you walk by the Cinnabon store in the airport in Denver and it smells like the world to come. You don't have to go to the world to come. It smells already like you have entered the world to come. And then you remember, oh my gosh, it's treif, it's not kosher. You say, Rabbi, what's not kosher? It's Cinnabons. It's just a bun. It was so simple. And they use lard and they use dairy and they mix other stuff. God help us all. It's not kosher. Doesn't say anywhere that things that aren't kosher can't smell very heavenly. Quite the contrary. And you make the decision, and it's hard for you with sweat and toil, but also with simcha. I get to do what God asks me, and I'm not going to eat in Cinnabon. I want to tell you a crazy story, and I'm going to wrap it up with that. On Monday, our family was coming on a ferry across from Orcas Island back to the mainland to Anacortes in the northwest Washington. And we were very early for our ferry, and we were standing going a little out of our minds at the ferry terminal outside over there. And there was a little puppy, a golden doodle. And we have a golden doodle, so the kids were playing. And before we knew it, we figured out that the couple there that was the golden doodle were Jewish. Where are they from? From Bainbridge Island. How did they get it? They sailed in their sailboats. And they have a little boat connected to the sailboat, so they leave the sailboat a little bit offshore, and then they take their little motor thing and they zoom it into the coat. They're Jewish. I asked him if he's willing to put on tefillin. Of course, he did. I wrapped him up in tefillin right at near the ferry terminal. They were excited. They took pictures for their rabbi back in the Chabad rabbi in Bainbridge Island. And then we boarded the ferry finally. And one of my kids, I think it was Chaya, said there's a guy over there with a Magen David, with a Star of David, and he has payas. So I went to snoop him out, to scope him out. He had a Star of David, but he definitely did not have payas. He just had very, very long hair, and it was all over the place. He must have been camping for a couple of days, and it looked like he was hiding payas. I waited for him to finish purchasing his thing, and I asked him if I said, my kids pointed out your Star of David. He goes, yeah, my name is, Milo, and my Hebrew name is Mordechai. And we wrapped him in tefillin on the ferry. And then Chavi offered him a cookie, a gluten-free cookie that we had bought in a health food store. And he goes, I can't have it because I'm about to eat a hot dog. Right? He's about to eat a non-kosher hot dog, but he didn't want to mix it with a dairy cookie. So we said to him, we don't eat, it's a parav cookie. It's gluten-free parav. He said, in that case, I'd love to have it. And I'm thinking to myself, look at God's children. He's eating a treif hot dog on a ferry from Orcas Island to Anacortes. He's willing to put on tefillin in public in front of a boat full of random people, and he won't eat a cookie because he thought it was dairy, and he doesn't want to eat it mixing milk and meat. And a naysayer, let's say from Williamsburg or Rechveis, would say, the guy's eating it. Why don't you tell him to not eat his treif hot dog? My job is not to tell people what to do. My job is to point out to God how beautiful his children are. And I have no doubt that as God looked at that ferry, he's like, oh my, look at this neshama. He's eating a hot dog I told him not to eat, but he's not willing to mix it with a dairy cookie. That's that's toil. That's above and beyond. That's doing it with zest and with enthusiasm and simcha. And when we do that, Hashem showers us with blessings that are incredible. So let's allow ourselves not just to be blessed like we are in this week's Torah portion, when we do it with all our heart and our soul, that the rain will come at night, and the rain will come maybe on Saturday, on Friday night. Let's allow ourselves to do the Leviticus blessing, which is go above and beyond. It doesn't have to be every time, but once in a while, go above and beyond and do it b'simcha, and allow those blessings to fall straight into the receptacle that you created in your life, internalized, felt. As the Rebbe would always say, b'toiv hanira v'nigla, that the blessings that God give us should not only be good. Everything God does is good, but it should be toiv hanira v'hanigla, which means good that is visible and revealed. And in all our lives, the blessings that God give us should be revealed good. It should be visible good. It should be internalized good, until we merit the ultimate good with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. May they speedily in our days. Amen. Have a wonderful